Member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I rise to support the Prime Minister's motion and to support the measured approach that the Prime Minister has taken on this issue. And the message from the Australian Government, there are three key messages there. Firstly, the first priority of any Australian government is to keep our people safe. Secondly, this is directed against terrorism and not religion. And thirdly, that Australians should feel comfortable going about their daily business. There is a heightened alert, but people still should be able to go about their daily business. And in talking on the first priority, that of keeping the Australian people safe, Australians should feel confident that in ASIO, that in the Australian Federal Police, we have excellent institutions which are well led and which we should be very proud of. Australia has developed, successive Australian governments have developed an expertise against terrorism dating back to the 1978 bombings outside the Sydney Hilton Hotel. We've gained that experience through the events of September 11, 2001, through the bombings in Bali of October 2002, which saw the beginnings of a very strong cooperative relationship between the Australian Federal Police and the Indonesian police. We saw an attack on the Australian Embassy in Jakarta in 2004. There were the London bombings in 2005 and the Bali bombings in October 2005. But Australians should feel confident that the steps that were taken, going all the way back to 1978, but more recently following the September 11 bombings, mean that we are well served by ASIO and by the Australian Federal Police. There have been a number of terrorist cells that have been disrupted. We've seen raids conducted in Sydney, Brisbane and Melbourne. We saw the horrific attack on two policemen in Melbourne. I also wanted to speak to the second message, and that is that this is directed against terrorism and not religion. And I wanted to say how welcome the strong leadership from Muslim leaders who have denounced ISIL, who've been prepared to really stand up and be counted and to denounce ISIL. It's very important that the Muslim community do feel the warm embrace of the Australian nation because they are key allies in addressing terrorism and extremism. This is not a problem that's isolated to Australia. We've heard that more than 80 countries have had citizens from their country travel to the Middle East to take part in terrorist activities. And that's why the Australian government are taking a number of steps to address this. The concern now is that with such easy international travel, it's possible for foreign fighters who learn to kill overseas and then return to Australia to continue their murderous trade. We saw this with people who travelled to Afghanistan more than a decade ago. And the Prime Minister's clear message is that all Australians who fight with terrorist groups is that you will be arrested, prosecuted and jailed for a very long time. There are a number of responses that this Parliament has to take in addressing the financing of terrorism, in addressing metadata and making sure that our intelligence agencies are one step ahead and have an idea of what the terrorists are up to. In dealing with the commitment to the Middle East, we have an air task group now in the Middle East at our major base in the Middle East, and 400 Air Force personnel are now there. And just today we heard that some of the Australian assets there have commenced flights over Iraq. One of the things which I think has been a very good development is that there is a very broad international coalition that has formed to disrupt and degrade ISIL. There is a wide involvement from the Gulf states and Arab nations. Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and Qatar are all involved. There are a number of NATO countries involved, as well as the United States and the United Kingdom. And as well as participating in humanitarian aid drops and also assistance to the Kurdish regional government, that the Australian Defence Force assets are ready to commence action against ISIL in Iraq. But it's very important. There is a strong process that's been mapped out for the steps that would be taken before going to that. And firstly, a request from the Iraqi national government. The Defence Minister has been in Iraq recently to make sure that the legal basis for any action in Iraq is very strong. Secondly, there would be a meeting of the National Security Committee of Cabinet, which would have briefings from the ADF, from ASIO and from the Australian Federal Police. The full Cabinet would then make a decision, and the opposition would also be briefed on this. And I also do want to pay tribute to the role the opposition has played here. Some people have talked about action in Syria. That is getting really one step ahead. As I outlined, the process for action in Iraq that's been outlined is a strong process. That really concludes my remarks. I think our thoughts really should be with all the ADF personnel who are now on pre-deployment in the Middle East. I was lucky enough to meet a number of them at Amberley and Williamtown in the last couple of weeks. They're a very professional group. They are, by and large, young Australian men and women. They will no doubt do us proud should they be required to take on this important task.